Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast brought to you by SBM Intelligence, Nigeria's leading geopolitical platform. I'm your host, Judy Gaya, and every Saturday we look at some stories shaping our continent. First up, Nigeria's GDP has taken a hit. Despite showing higher growth than the same period last year, Nigeria's GDP growth has dipped compared to the previous quarter. We'll also explore the factors that could influence Nigeria's economic performance in coming months and pinpoint where the government might need to focus its economic policies to stabilize and boost growth. Next, we turn to Nigeria's thriving film industry. Nollywood's box office revenue soared by 46% year on year in Q1 of 2024. What's driving this impressive growth? While revenues are up, admissions have dipped. What challenges could this pose for Nollywood's long-term sustainability? And with local Nollywood productions capturing a large market share than Hollywood, what does this say about Nigerian audiences' preferences? Finally, we look ahead to the pivotal South African elections in 2024. What are the critical economic challenges, such as high unemployment and frequent blackouts, that the country faces? With the election on the horizon, what are the key issues at stake, and how could this result shape South Africa's future domestically and internationally? Joining me for in-depth analysis and expert insights on these critical stories is Ikemesit Effiong, partner at SBM Intelligence. Welcome, Ikemesit.
Thanks for having me, Judy.
Okay, so we dive right into our first story, where Nigeria's GDP appears to be better than the same quarter last year, but worse than the previous quarter. Ikemesit, can you explain what GDP is and why it's important for the country's economy?
Well, the gross domestic product of the GDP of a country refers to the sum total of all the goods and services which every individual resident in a particular country you produced or created or made happen over the course of a given time period. Now, GDP is usually measured annually, right? But a lot of economies measure GDP on a quarter-to-quarter basis, right? And what that means is that policymakers as well as economic participants can have a fairly broad idea about how productive and how efficient an economy is. So the real value of the GDP figure is that it's a very, very useful instant shorthand for assessing how well an economy is doing. If your GDP is rising, it simply means that, or it indicates that the economic participants in that particular economy have been more productive relative to another given period in time, whether it's within the past year or within the past quarter. Conversely, if your GDP is shrinking, if it's getting smaller, then it's an indication that the economic participants in your economy are less productive, and that could be for any number of reasons. So GDP figures are really critical in just giving anyone who just wants to have a snapshot of what Uganda or the Maldives or South Africa is doing. They can simply look at the GDP figures, compare that with the GDP figures for those economies in the past, and then they have a useful sense of how well or otherwise that economy is doing.
Okay, so you did mention that GDP is used to measure how productive and efficient the economy is doing. How productive and efficient is the Nigerian economy currently?
Well, I mean, the new GDP figures, right, indicates that we are growing. We grew by 2.98%, and that's always good. Obviously, like I said, a GDP is a useful shorthand. If you want to go into
Hello? Hello?
Is your country's rate of population
Sorry, I
growth.
lost
So if
you.
there's a,
I lost you at some point.
I see. Oh,
Yes.
my connection timed out. Do you have me now?
Okay, yes, I do.
Oh, okay, great. Let me just get off my Wi-Fi and use my mobile data. Okay, so do I run that back? Do I take that again?
Yes, but the thing is, they don't edit.
They'll have to edit them around. Um, okay, so just ask me the question again, and then I'll
All
just
right.
continue.
Okay. So you did mention that the GDP is used to measure how productive or how efficient an economy is doing. How productive and how efficient would you say the Nigerian economy is currently?
Okay, so the thing with the new GDP numbers, right, is that the Nigerian economy grew at what was it, 2.98% or so in the first quarter of this year. The first thing to recognize is we are growing. It is possible for you to have negative growth. It's possible for the size of your economy or the total value of the goods and services that your economy produces to shrink, right? So we are growing. That's a good thing. One of the useful things, though, if you really want to understand how well an economy is doing, is to look at
Yeah.
GDP growth relative to other key statistical indicators. The most popular one that a lot of economists as well as analysts use is to pair GDP growth to population growth. So if you have a situation where your economy is growing, but it is not keeping pace with how much larger, right, your overall population is, then in nominal or in real terms, right, your economy is basically paying catch up with the number of people that it has to cater to. So when you look at average population growth in Nigeria, it typically shifts between 2.4 to 2.7%. So when you pair that with the new GDP numbers, and you actually even look at GDP numbers over the last couple of quarters, what you find out is that Nigeria's economy is barely matching population growth. In other words, the economy is growing at a rate where it is struggling to cater to both the number of Nigerians that existed in that economy at the start of the quarter where those GDP figures were measured, but also the number of Nigerians that were added by the end of that statistical measuring period as well. And that's where the GDP figures begin to look, less than exciting, just because we are barely keeping up, probably by what is it, 1 or 2 percentage points. We're barely keeping up with average population growth that we've seen in Nigeria over the last 10 to 15 years. So so those are two key learnings, right, to take from our new GDP numbers. The third one is to look at productivity in and of itself. So there's a separate measure that most economies use to measure productivity, which is how much work is the average Nigerian getting for every hour, right, that they put in. So if you have a situation where, and typically, right, those productivity figures tend to go up the more skilled or the more specialized skills exist in a particular economy. There's only a finite number of bricks, for example, that a bricklayer can make if he's using manual human power, right? If
Mm-hmm.
that same bricklayer is deploying technology in terms of maybe using a bricklaying machine or some sort of conveyor process in order to ensure that those bricks are not only made quickly, but they are conveyed quickly right to the site where a particular construction is taking place, then the amount of bricks that same bricklayer is able to make, but with those technological additives, is that much more exponential. If you increase the number of machines, for example, one bricklayer with maybe a supervisor and a few other manual laborers will probably be able to produce 4, 5, 6 times, right, what everybody just mixing and pouring manually would. When you look at we don't yet have so those quantitative productivity indicators for Nigeria. But when you think about the fact that only 64% of Nigerians are literate, which means they can read, write, and speak, not only in English, but in any Nigerian language, right? And then you pair the kinds of jobs that are attached to English language skills, and then look at the type of jobs that are paired to specialized skills, which you may, pick up either in a university or a technical institute, right? And the number of Nigerians that tertiary graduates is still in the low tens. I think it's about 11-12% or something of the sort. You can see that the economy is not really set up to be as productive as its potential suggests. And if the economy is not set up to be as productive as it can be, it puts a lid on GDP growth, it puts a lid on quarterly GDP growth and the potential for people in that economy to produce goods and services. So those are sort of the three layers with which to, really critically assess the latest numbers that we have. And by every measure, the only positive thing of note is we are growing, but we're not growing as fast as we should, and we're not growing anywhere close to our potential.
Okay. So that brings me my next question. Although there is an overall decline in the GDP rate, the service sector seems to be driving growth. Can you break down which service industries are performing well and why?
Yeah, so the thing to understand is the way the National Bureau of Statistics, which is Nigeria's statistical agency, looks at the economy. So its broad view of the economy is that it divides economic activity into three categories: agriculture, which is self-explanatory; industry, which is also kind of self-explanatory. So everything that has to do with manufacturing or additional processing of goods, right, is classified as industries. And then services, which is basically everything else: banking, technology, transportation, health, yada, 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 and on. The thing with the services, so using those three broad categories, right, agriculture still employs the most amount of Nigerians. So about 80 to 85 million Nigerians, right, are farmers or are involved in, agriculture in some way, shape, or form. Industries is the smallest broad category and broad sectoral category. And honestly, for an economy that is looking to rapidly develop, right, you want the industrial base of that economy to be significantly larger than it is now, at least with respect to Nigeria. Services is then comprised of everything else. Now, if you remember what I said about the productivity base of an economy, so how skilled are your workers in an economy, and how efficiently do they apply those skills, or how efficient are they in applying those skills to the work that they do, such that they are able to create high value work. Services is where to look at. The vast majority of people who graduate from Nigeria's universities and technical institutions, basically broadly all of the tertiary educational institutions we have in Nigeria, they are warehoused in the services component of the economy. So what that means is, even though a majority of Nigerians work in agriculture, because Nigerian agriculture is still not technologically advanced, right? A lot of Nigerian agriculture is still carried out at the same level that our ancestors, our grandparents and great-grandparents did. So that sector is not very efficient. The comparatively smaller services sector is able to pull its weight more significantly because those Nigerians who are in that broad sectoral category are more skilled, and in theory, they have the capacity to be more productive. That's why you have a situation where services comprises 50 to 51%, right, of our GDP at any given point in time. And that's why services have largely carried the Nigerian economy, not just in the quarter in review, but really over the last 10 years. So you've had a situation where agriculture in Nigeria has wobbled from a growth perspective over the last decade. Industries has been the big loser. Industries have suffered. Nigeria's relatively small manufacturing base has actually hollowed out over the last decade. It's gotten smaller and smaller as all of the infrastructural as well as regulatory headwinds that participants in manufacturing have to deal with has really, really exerted a cost on their operations. Services has been the real growth area. Telecommunications, the number of Nigerians who not only have a mobile phone connection, but now own smartphones has increased and increased and increased. Over the last decade, it's gone from something like 17% of Nigerians having a smartphone to about 40% of Nigerians. That's a big technological leap because the content creation economy, for example, Nollywood, music, film, right, has been built on the backbone of that growth, right, in telecommunications. Financial services has always traditionally been a good bellwether for how the economy is going. So generally, telecoms and finances are growing well. The economy grows because those two subsectors on their own, right, are pulling a lot of the other relatively non-productive sectors up. In Q1 of 2022, financial services was the big winner. I think it grew by something like 25 or so percent, right? This was on the back of all of the major Nigerian banks declaring close to record profits of the main Nigerian banks. The operating term for them is FUGAS. So First Bank, UBA, GT Bank, Access Bank, as well as Zenith Bank. They giving dividends to their shareholders. Financial services did well. Telecommunication did worse than finances, but it still grew. It just grew by marginal rates of 2-ish%. That particular industry is really dealing with the brunt of adverse regulation in terms of things, for example, like rights of way fees that Nigeria states are allowed to set, and many states set really astronomical and wild rates. There was regulation has still not enhanced the rollout of 5G, for example, as well as existing 4G networks all across the country, which would obviously guarantee higher internet speeds, better connectivity. And the hope is that will all lead to better productivity. So those are sort of the key sectors that did well in the quarter under review. The concern is looking forward to Q2 and Q3. A lot of Nigeria's banks were able to declare profits because they were able to make a lot of money off of Nigeria's interesting foreign exchange situation. It's not clear that they may be able. So it almost feels fluky in the sense that that's not a sustainable way to generate revenue and also generate profits. And the concern is they may not be able to do that in Q2 and Q3. The situation with telecoms remains as is. It's unclear if regulation will unlock, existing value right in those spaces, especially since there's a national conversation happening now about where data prices should go. The telcos want the data price floor, which is basically the band with which the communications regulator allows them to set data prices. They want that floor increased, right? And many consumers are obviously balking at the prospects of having to pay more for data. So it's unclear whether that gets resolved by the end of Q2 or into Q3 for those to reflect in, the revenue lines of all of the telcos. So there are important concerns around what little growth that we're having in the economy. And the concern is 2.98 in Q1 may begin to look like the high watermark for growth for our economy in 2024.
Okay. So considering what you said about how skilled Nigerian labor is, are there any areas that the government might want to focus its economic policies?
It's going to be a combination of economic policy as well as policy in other areas. For example, a lot of Nigerians, including those who have university degrees, need a significant amount of upskilling in order for them to be better productive in a contemporary, growing, developing economy. Policy has to incentivize not only employers, right, to continue to invest in the upskilling of their talent, but also in research institutions, in educational institutions, so that the kind of graduates that we are churning out are also world-class and they are able to be competitive. We need to do something about our foreign exchange regulatory regime. The Naira is in a situation where it is floating, or at least it's floating relative to its historical mean, right? But you still have a situation where the central bank is continually intervening in the markets in order to keep the value of the naira within what it deems as an acceptable price. But it basically, it really does not want the naira to stray too far away from 1,000 to the dollar. But that's distorting incentives within the economy where people are willing to sit on their foreign exchange holdings with the anticipation that the naira will get weaker and they will be able to get more naira for whether it's their USD or their British pound or their euro. The concern is that is stifling the amount of investments into equipment, factories, land improvements, and ultimately, salaries as well as skill improvements for employees. So those are sort of the very broad things, just because we're a little pressed for time, that I would say the government needs to focus on very quickly.
Okay, so we move on to our next story. Nollywood revenues spiked for Q1 of 2024, and Film one of the major film distributors in Nigeria, is projecting annual earnings of 10 billion naira. Ikeme said, what factors are responsible for the 46% growth that we've witnessed in Nollywood revenue, sorry?
The big thing to look at with respect to the revenue lines for all of the big cinema and groups is prices. So within the quarter or shortly before the quarter under review, the prices for your average movie tickets were reviewed upwards, right? It's now a bit more expensive for the average theater goer to purchase a ticket to see a movie. And so that showed up what still within the quarter under review, a decrease in footfall and viewer traffic, right? So less people are going to the cinemas, but they are purchasing tickets at a higher price point, and that was able to sustain some of the revenue lines for all of these theater groups, whether it's Film One or Genesis or Zone or Silverbird. The question with respect to revenue sustainability for all of those players is whether is what they are going to do to combat the reduced amount of patronage that they are seeing, because you can only increase ticket prices to a particular point until it itself becomes a reason why people don't go to see movies, as against all of the other structural things that are happening in entertainment and streaming in general that is impacting on their impacting on the number of people who see movies in cinemas.
Okay, are you saying that the only factor responsible for this revenue spike is the increase in ticket prices?
It's the main one, right? It's the main one. Everything else is ancillary. Improvements to cinema infrastructure was marginal during the period under review. Obviously, like I said, less people are going to the cinemas, and it's certainly not the content. It's certainly not the content variety, right, that is pulling people to the cinema. As a matter of fact, as we sort of delve deeper into this conversation, we'll actually find out that the real reason why lots of people are actually not going to see movies as they did historically is just because the cinemas have more, they have more effective competition for eyeballs.
Okay. Do you think, considering what you just said, do you think that in the long term, this growth is sustainable?
Yes, so that's the big concern, right? You can only increase prices by so much, and people just tune up. The average ticket price was close to 4,000 naira within this quarter under review. Every streaming platform, every streaming option, right, that is out there in the Nigerian market has a bouquet, or they have streaming tiers that are less than that amount. As a matter of fact, all of the cable TV operators in our market have bouquets and price tiers that are lower than the average price of getting a movie ticket, right, in Nigeria. And so the question that really arises is how competitive is cinema relative to getting a Netflix or a Showmax account, or just purchasing a plan on Star Times or DSTV or GoTV. When you think about what is involved in the process of making a decision to go see a movie, I know you, Judy, you love to dress, and you've got to dress up, you've got to leave your house, you've got to pay transportation or drive down to the cinema. And because in this particular market, pre-bookings or booking ahead of time, basically going online, seeing a movie that you want, and then making a reservation ahead of time is not common, right? People basically go to the cinemas on a wing and a prayer, hoping that they find something interesting to watch. When you compare that with cooking up a nice meal, sitting on your couch with your partner or your special one, or friends, and just looking for something on Netflix or Showmax or on TV to watch, many Nigerians are making the judgment that it's easier to stream or to watch cable TV than to go to the cinemas. So that's the real sustainability concern that all of these operators have. I should say, though, the one positive with the numbers that we saw is that more Nigerians are likelier to watch Nollywood movies at the cinema than Hollywood movies. Obviously, the second sustainability concern that arises for these cinemas is all of the streamers are increasing their share of Nollywood content on their platforms. So even that comparative advantage may begin to whittle down in the months and years ahead.
Okay, so what trends can we expect in Nollywood's box office performance moving forward, and how might changes in ticket pricing or production strategies affect the industry and its audiences? Hello? 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 Considering what you just mentioned, what trends can we expect in Nollywood's box office performance moving forward?
I think we're probably entering an era of reduced earnings, right, for the cinemas. A lot of producers and directors and screenwriters are migrating to the streaming platforms just because the economics make more sense. The streamers are able to offer more than what the traditional financiers and power that be within Nollywood can. So we're probably in for a new era where, one, there is increased access to Nollywood content on all of the streaming platforms, and basically the cinemas will compete over the crumbs. So those directors and those producers that either don't have any reputation or name recognition, such that they are palatable to the streamers, will sort of be the people that that the cinemas as well as traditional media will sort of compete over. I think that's a long term trend which has already commenced. You already see bits of that happening already. That will persist for quite some time to come.
Okay, very interesting discussion there. And finally, we head over to South Africa, where reports say early results put the ruling African National Congress Party, ANC, in early lead, while the Democratic Alliance sits second and former President Zuma's Nkoto Wesizwe MK party is currently third. So, can you give us a brief overview of South Africa's current political landscape and introduce the major political parties and their leaders?
Okay, I should say though that it was very adventurous of you trying to pronounce the full name of the NK party. I'm just going to call them the NK party. Right. So in South Africa tradition, I think the first thing to mention is um, this election this year represents the 30th anniversary of South Africa's return back to South Africa's emergence as a multi-party democracy. Following the end of apartheid. Now, throughout this 30-year period, the African National Congress, which was the party of Nelson Mandela, and all of the fighters and the activists who fought for the end of apartheid, has been the omnipresent party. Now, in the last elections in 2019, a lot of the commentary, especially the media commentary, made a big deal of the fact that the ANC for the first time fell below 60%, right, of the votes cast, right? I think the operative number was about 57 or so percent, right? We are now seeing a situation where for the first time ever, the ANC will be the largest party in parliament, but the ANC will not have a majority in parliament, which is 50% and above for it to govern in its own right. And that's largely because the MK party, the one you tried to pronounce, which is the party of former President Jacob Zuma, who was an ANC member and the ANC leader at the time when he was president, when he was kicked out or when he was forced to resign on corruption charges, right? He set up this party literally in the build up to the elections. There was a lot of concern and uncertainty about whether he would run right in his own right. In fact, right now, the MK party is dealing with an internal leadership crisis over who is in charge of the party. Jacob Zuma is contesting with this particular figure called Jacob Humalo, who for the leadership of the NK party. But what the NK party has done is it has pulled traditional ANC votes, especially rural votes, and especially votes in Jacob Zuma's home province of KwaZulu-Natal. And so you have a situation right now where the NK's 11% paired with the ANC's current 42-ish percent, right? If you paired them together with a Jacob Zuma within the ANC would have comfortably crossed the finish line. This is not to ignore, obviously, the party which is projected with all of the vote totals that are coming in to be the second largest party in parliament, which is the Democratic Alliance Party, or the DA. It's a traditionally white party. The DA was formed as a merger of two parties, one of which was the most active and the ruling party during apartheid. So the DA has always had an image problem, especially with Black South Africans, which are one, a majority of South Africans, right? And two, they mostly avoided voting for the DA because of those apartheid precedents. Increasingly, though, it's been increasing its vote share, right, of parliament. This is going to be the first time, looking at the returns that are coming in, that the DA is going to have a reduced share of the national vote than in a previous election cycle. And that's largely, again, because of those people who have migrated in large droves to the MK. The last major party to talk about, is the EFF, or the Economic Freedom Fighters. They are led by, again, this former ANC youth leader, Julius Malema, who was pushed out of the party during the time of Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma. And they've historically never committed to be a party of government, so they are not interested in negotiating with anybody, being part of any governing alliance. They really just exist to disrupt and largely spoil the party or some of the other big parties. And some of their proposed policies would make, let's forget white South Africans or even investors, they would make any investor, black or white, right, scary. They want to nationalize land, they want to nationalize a lot of companies, not just the state-owned companies, and they want to pursue what they see as an amnesty um, for not an amnesty. They want to pursue reparations, right, for Black South Africans for all of the sufferings that they had to, endure over the course of apartheid. It's a really radical and political program. Nobody really sees them as a party of governance. But in a situation now where the ANC needs coalition partners, in a situation now where the ANC needs coalition partners in order to form a government, the current president Cyril Ramaphosa may be forced to make some very uncomfortable calls, including one to Julius Malema, possibly.
Okay. Would you say, is it safe to say that the ANC has lost the confidence of majority of Black South Africans?
Well, I don't know that you can say the ANC has lost the confidence of a majority of Black South Africans. What I can say is that the ANC has lost the confidence of enough Black South Africans that right now, those South Africans have gone to the polling booths and exacted a significant political cost for the ANC. What you're increasingly seeing, and this is, I was going to say to be fair to the ANC, but that's really underselling it. But it's interesting that these dynamics are not only present in South African politics, but you can actually see a lot of these dynamics occur right across the continent. A lot of political parties, which were either the parties of struggle or of independence or of a transition from military to civilian democratic rule, have increasingly been punished at the ballot box by voters right across the continent. You've seen this happen in you've seen this happen in Tanzania, you've seen this happen in Zimbabwe, you've seen this happen a bit more famously in Nigeria, where the People's Democratic Party is as so what you've seen with a lot of these parties, most famously the People's Democratic Party, which hasn't been a party of governance for it's getting to 10 years now, I think it's 9 years and counting, is that voters in African countries, especially countries that have a long or a reasonable, a reasonable democratic tradition over a period of time, are willing to punish these voters. Africa has a very young demographic. Lots of people, the number of Africans that have come of age in the age of democracy is on pace to outpace, those Africans who lived under military or in South Africa's case, under apartheid rule. A lot of those voters don't have a memory of the struggle. They are less emotionally connected to these big tent umbrella parties, which were the parties of struggle or the parties of the democratic transition, and they are just willing to vote for other options. That's really what you're seeing in South Africa. A lot of the Black South Africans that no longer trust the ANC are often young, urban, upwardly mobile, and they don't understand why a country with abundant natural and human resources is not able to deliver good education, deliver consistent power, is corrupt, and is basically punching below its weight. If you needed one emblematic symbol of how degraded South Africa, right, has become, the main election dashboard at the National Election Center, which indicates all of the vote returns and so totals coming in from all of the districts and all of the provinces across the country. It broke down this morning. Well, it broke down on Friday morning, right? And it was offline for more than an hour, and nobody really had a clue as to what was going on. That image, that symbolism for many voters is emblematic of just how far down the ANC has brought South Africa, and they are now more than willing to make their opinion known at the ballot box.
Okay, so one last question. How might the results affect South Africa's future, both domestically and internationally?
Well, I think I think it's just going to usher in an era of divided governments, right? In South Africa, the ANC is no longer the omnipresent force that it was in South African politics, and so its various political levers cannot guarantee stability, which South Africa really needs in order to manage through, in order to wade through the difficult transitional period that it's dealing with. The ANC has to negotiate. It has to find political allies. Those allies will extract a lot of concessions. And oftentimes, in the process of policy implementation, there will be differences. There will be conflicts. This just portends an era which may which may eventually see South Africa a weaker political force, a weaker political force within Southern Africa and largely within the continent, just because its leaders' focus is divided with trying to fight domestic political fires.
Okay, thank you, Ikemesi, for this very interesting discussion and participating in this episode. And to all our listeners, this podcast is brought by SBM Intelligence. For deeper insights into our work, visit our website at www.sbmintelligence.com. And remember to connect with us on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. That's all for today. Thanks for listening.